War costs. President Obama has chosen a West Point venue for his big speech next Tuesday, outlining his new plan for Afghanistan. And David, he's going to have to explain a couple of difficult things here, including why putting more troops in is actually a way out of Afghanistan, and why the whole exercise is worth it when you have increasing calls among Democrats saying that this is just not worth the cost in blood or treasure.
The message challenge, that first part that you were saying, is going to be very tricky for him, obviously wanting to do this at the backdrop with all of these cadets who will one day perhaps be serving in this effort, is something that the White House wanted to drive home as well. Copenhagen take two. Yes, this is clearly the city in the world that has proven to be Barack Obama's cross to bear. He's going to head back to Copenhagen in December, announced today by the White House. This for the climate change summit. You'll recall he had that disastrous turn of events there when he lost the Chicago Olympics bid in Copenhagen. And Rick, he doesn't have much more that he's going to be able to deliver this time around. The White House put out the objectives that the president's going to go over there with. They match the Kerry-Boxer bill in the Senate, the bill that passed the House. Of course, there will be no bill out of the Senate. They're not going to even address this issue. So it's all about goals. He will have nothing to actually deliver at this climate change conference.
That's the tricky thing, is that once again, he's going to be going out there and talking about things. He could be getting far ahead of where the Congress is willing to go, which causes some international blowback. And as you say, the standard they set for this one is, can he make a difference by going over there? They have the same standard for the Chicago Olympics, for what it's worth. Dobbs for something. Since leaving CNN, Lou Dobbs has made noises about running for president in 2012, and now a suggestion in the New York Times today that would lower his sights somewhat, but set up a very intriguing matchup if it were to happen. He says that he may be thinking about running for the Senate in New Jersey against Senator Bob Menendez, and this, of course, would be a showdown over immigration like we've never seen before in a race that high profile. Senator Menendez outspoken in his support for comprehensive immigration reform, large benefits for people who are here now as undocumented immigrants. Lou Dobbs doesn't agree with that.
Immigration, an issue in New Jersey, more so than many other states that we've seen as well. And Lou Dobbs, this is not the first time he's flirted with New Jersey political office, and it'll be very interesting to see if he actually follows through with this. I was already interested to see he had an official spokesman already on the topic. And the Obama Thanksgiving. Yes, the first family is preparing after the turkey pardon that you just saw earlier to go do a service event. They did this last year in Chicago as well when they were, I guess, the first family in waiting. And then the White House schedule has them down at the White House all weekend, traveling nowhere, which of course makes those of us who are a little skeptical of that, thinking if the president may pop up a surprise somewhere around the world.
If he had access to a plane, maybe you could see that. But in the meantime, I'm giving him props for a politically charged pardon by getting into this debate over Save to Create jobs. That's a little more edgy than we usually see a president at a turkey pardoning.
An edgy Barack Obama. We're going to begin with his big Afghanistan push. We are joined by Andy Johnson, who heads up the National Security Policy Program at Third Way, a Democratic centrist organization, think tank in town. And I do want to begin, now that we're starting to get, Andy, some idea of what the president is going to announce on Tuesday night up at West Point. This idea of 34,000 more troops in, getting NATO to put an additional 5,000 to 10,000, sort of get McChrystal the full McChrystal request that he needed. And yet, part of what's taken so long in the deliberations is the fact that he's wanted, as Rick was saying earlier, to talk about how this surge will actually end the involvement in Afghanistan. Do you think it's wise to lay out the end game at the beginning without knowing what's going to take place?
I do, but in general terms. I think President Obama needs to accomplish two things when he addresses the United States people and the Congress and the world on Tuesday. He needs to explain why the war in Afghanistan is a war of necessity, as he said in March, and why we are there to protect American lives against terrorist attack. But he also needs to lay out a strategy that really, as he says, finishes what we started. And part of that is going to be to assure the American people that there is an end point to our involvement in Afghanistan, and that as we try to create a new strategy of security and stability, that he's mindful of how the drawdown will take place.
What do you make of the backdrop that he's choosing, going to West Point? Obviously, better backdrop being in that element than it would be if it was an Oval Office address. But I think we're going to hear Republicans immediately say that using the troops as props for a political speech like this is not appropriate.
Well, it's time-tested and tried tradition for the commander-in-chief to use as a backdrop military academies, and it's a smart one. But it also brings to the American people the visual reminder of the gravity of this situation. And that is that we have Americans in harm's way in Afghanistan and in Iraq to protect American security against, in this case, a terrorist attack. He will try to lay out very clearly how we're going to have to require more of our allies, how we're going to have to train the Afghans to take care of their own security eventually, but also, and more importantly, and also not overlooked, the sense that Pakistan needs to take the fight to al-Qaeda insurgents, or excuse me, Taliban insurgents and al-Qaeda terrorists in Pakistan if, in fact, what we're doing in Afghanistan is going to succeed.
You're talking about his need to lay out a strategy to train these Afghan soldiers, to have the partnership with the Afghan government to root out the Taliban from continuing to take further hold and making sure al-Qaeda cannot in any way reconstitute the kind of training ground that they had pre-9/11. And yet, the Speaker of the House just said Hamid Karzai is not a worthy partner. He's about to lay out a strategy here, but do we have a government in Afghanistan who can join us in this effort?
Great question. And I think what we need is a reliable partner, not actually a pristine partner that embraces Jeffersonian democracy. Look, the objective here is a military objective. It's one of national security and protecting American lives. It's not bringing fair and open elections or the sort of democratic reforms that we may want to see in Afghanistan, but are unlikely to actually occur over the next few years. We need to have a reliable partner. It could very well be that corruption is going to be a matter of fact in Afghan politics and governance for years to come. We need to deal with that and keep our eyes on the prize. We're not there to nation build. We're there to protect the American people, and we need to have lasting security when we pull out, and that doesn't necessarily mean the sort of pristine democratic institutions that we are usually accustomed to.
How does President Obama handle the domestic politics on this? There's a lot of Democrats who are saying we just can't afford it, and there's an increasing talk of a special war surtax. First of all, why not pay for it? If you're going to make this sacrifice as a nation, is there something wrong with President Obama saying, you know what, that may be the right way to go, to tack on an additional tax to make sure this is paid for?
We will pay for our involvement, and we will not fight on the cheap. The question is, do we increase the deficit and the debt associated with our spending if it's not offset? I think at this point, the focus should be on what we can accomplish, how we're going to do it, and what we need from our Afghan partners, our Pakistan partners, and our allied partners to achieve a new security and stability paradigm in Afghanistan. The financial aspect of this clearly affects what we can do with domestic spending. At this point, I would suggest not pursuing some sort of war tax. I think it's mostly for posturing purposes. There is a concern that there's not sort of shared pain with respect to our involvement in Afghanistan. But the bottom line is this: we need to protect America, and whether it's done through a deficit spending or whether it's done through offset spending, the first order of business is to get in place a strategy that will provide stability and security.
You don't have a position on the way to do the spending?
Well, I think, as we know, we could spend a lot of time on this. The funding of our federal efforts are fungible. We could also look at offsets in ways that could help fund our increased involvement. We are also going to be drawing down in Iraq. We're going to be pulling out our forces by 2011. So one thing I'd be asking is there a sort of zero-sum game as we reduce our troop presence in Iraq and lower our costs there, and as we increase them in Afghanistan, looking towards the next?
Very quickly, any scenario that you see that the Democrats would cut off funding?
No, absolutely not. And I think the war tax is a political, not a realistic solution.
A non-starter.
A non-starter.
Okay, Andy Johnson of Third Way, thank you very much for being here.
You.
We greatly appreciate it.
Thanks.